May it never be said that I chose the hard path. I didn't. I never chose the path I walked based on easy or hard. I walked the path of the good, no matter how high or low it went, and never abandoned a soul to suffer. Commander Oswald of the Medic Corps, 1955. Standard procedure. Mr. Meerman was pacing the front of the class as he read out of the textbook the story of XYZ, an anonymous soldier during the international conflict who was credited with being the first soldier to renounce their rank and nationality to be a neutral healer for all. Of course, it wasn't that easy, as being a different race and speaking different languages often led to more trouble. Soldiers wanting to kill them or take them prisoner. Yet the story goes on, ending at Peace Day and the official founding of the Medic Corps by XYZ themselves, whoever they are. The medic's origin was unknown, and was possibly multiple people around the world. The stories of XYZ were always vague on details of where and when and who, only describing the universal details like eyes and teeth and hateful expressions and cries of pain as they would work to save the lives of who they could. Now class, pain is universal. It has to be. Pain is the acknowledgement of harm, and without it, you would get ripped apart and never know you need to recover. An important detail, since acting on the world makes the world act back. Hit something with a rock in hand, and the rock hits your hand. Even if controlled, you will be harmed, and you will need to recover. Your body will tell you as much. That's a part of survival. However, this fact of the world has resulted in people prescribing meaning to pain itself. That without suffering, there would be no meaning to life. Well, as someone who can turn off their sense of pain, that ain't true. Still, if you, or worse, someone else, suffers for something you want, then you inherently, instinctively appreciate it more. But that's easily contributable to the sunk cost fallacy. The idea that investment itself, this case the suffering, gives the finished product more inherent value. York raised a hand. Mr. Meerman, that's not quite the sunk cost fallacy. Not important. Mr. Meerman waved him off. Adrian tissed and spoke up. Well, I call bull. Sure, pain itself isn't a good thing. Even I don't like it. Getting or giving. But a fight ain't fair if one side doesn't get hurt. If you're so tough that nothing hurts, then there's no reason to fight. Mr. Meerman crossed his arms. Interesting. A level of mutual harm is the difference between battling and bullying. But is the pain necessary? Wouldn't the inflicted damage be the same without? Adrian opened his mouth to speak, but was lost for words. His brows furrowed as he thought on what to say. I think I understand, said XK88. I don't feel pain the same way as humans do. It's more of a direct response to my conscience. I can ignore it if I want, but that simply deactivates my reflexive actions. Or my subconscious, you can say. Imagine sticking your hand in fire. A human would pull back by instinct, and suffer if they didn't. I could stick my hand and keep it there without a single bit of discomfort. My body is still burning, and it's telling me so, but nothing is trying to make me pull it out. Your body is made of metal. It doesn't burn, Melissa Odinson noted from the back. XK88 rolled his eyes. It's a metaphor. Point is, I can take damage and not feel pain, meaning no reflectively acting on it. I could willingly take a much larger amount of harm, which means I could bring myself closer to flat out dying. Which, yes, I can, in fact, capital D, die. So I would, being able to turn my pain off and keep going, have more meaning to taking damage than suffering alone. But if you can't turn pain off, then pushing through it would add even more, meaning? Semi-Large added, scratching his head. I don't know the right word to use. Value is a fine stand-in for abstract ideas like this. Mr. Meerman offered. Okay, value. Suffering and pushing through adds value, right? Like when heroes fight villains and criminals. I think you two are working under a limited understanding, Samuel York interjected. Humans can, in fact, turn our sense of pain off. It's simply not under our conscious control. Adrenaline allows for increased performance. Though rather temporary, still we are capable of willingly taking damage. Well, Mr. York, do you believe pain adds value to harm taken? Mr. Meerman asked. But before York could give his answer, a knock came to the door. The door opened, and Vice Principal Thompson walked in with a suited woman behind him. Pardon, Simon, Mr. Thompson said with a slight bow, but I need to pull Miss Valentine from class. Why? Mr. Meerman asked reflectively. That's classified. The suited woman snapped with sharper reflexes, and Sarah's blood froze at that. She knew why they came for her, and she didn't like it. Excuse you? Mr. Meerman shouted back, squaring his shoulders and striding up to the woman. I hold the authority of an army captain. You don't get to pull that bull on me. Simon, Mr. Thompson said firmly, stepping between the two. No, Tom! This broad doesn't get to just waltz up in my class and... It's okay. Sara stood and started walking to the front. It's okay, Mr. Meerman. I know what they want. I'll go. You sure? Mr. Meerman asked, turning to look at her. 'Cause I can escort this mook to the front door manually, if you don't want to go. Thank you, but it's okay, Sara said, trying to keep a brave face. Mr. Meerman narrowed his eyes and frowned, watching her face. Okay, then. Mr. Meerman stood back as she walked out, and the door closed behind the three of them. Looking at the suited woman, Sara asked, How are we traveling? The suited woman checked her watch. Teleportation, but we need to wait until it's secured. Oh, how long? Sara didn't finish her question when the world warped around her and was now standing in an empty white room. Mr. Thompson was gone, but the suited woman was here. She smiled with approval. Perfect. I'm Agent Cass, by the way. The woman properly introduced herself. Thank you for coming. It's very important. Though, you're the last person who needs to be told that. She was. This wasn't the first time she's been asked to drop everything to be whisked away to someone who needed her help. She had been woken in the middle of the night, pulled out of movie theaters, and even had a date interrupted. She had the choice to go or not go. But every time she went, she had to. She was the only one who could do what she did. Agent Cass walked over to the wall and grabbed a door handle that was perfectly camouflaged in the white room, opening a door that was also perfectly hidden. Sara followed the lady into the main hall of an office building. It must have been rush hour or something, because nearly every person in the room was in motion. Dozens of people jogging along or scanning over documents with phones in hand. All of them were obviously demi-humans. Some by the little details in their eyes and hair. Others by the way they dressed and acted. A few of them by clearly being not human. Such as a Ludoyache, like Vlad and his brother Raz, who was typing on a typewriter with incredible speed. A large demonkin, 8 feet tall, with another 2 added by black horns, sticking through his blood-red skin. He was carrying a tray of coffees and pastries, trying to dish out orders in the chaos. Sitting next to the hallway we were turning down, sat a short and stout, possibly fey creature, maybe a gnome, examining and cleaning a platoon's worth of pistols. Busy day? Sara remarked. Very, Agent Cass answered. Multiple ZKT events, most by accident. Sara's eyes widened at that. ZKT was code for possible world ending. They technically happened all the time, but that didn't ease the nerves at the end of the day, even if there were entire organizations dedicated to stopping them. Hell, that made it worse. This wasn't the first time Sara had experienced this feeling of detached doom, and so she was able to soldier on and into an elevator with Agent Cass. Pushing a button, the elevator started to drop. Sara didn't know if the floor they had started on was above ground, but she was sure they were below the earth when the elevator opened onto a hospital-like environment. Sterilized white tiles, and the walls with lights that just barely but continuously buzzed. Agent Cass guided Sara down the hallway to a window that looked into a room where a dead man laid, still breathing through pure stubbornness and the miracle of modern medicine. The man had more gone than remaining. "Sweet mercy," Sara whispered. "What happened to him?" "Do you need to know that for the healing to work?" Agent Cass asked. "I'm actually asking. I'll tell you either way." "No, I don't need to know anything. Maybe that's better. But still, what the hell?" Long story short, someone fired a shot aimed at destroying the world, and he stepped in front of it. They walked into the room. The beeping of the machines no longer muffled by the walls drilled into Sara each time. She walked up to the man and looked him over. She could smell his insides. It wasn't that terrible. It just smelled like raw sewage. "Is he conscious?" Sara asked. "The healing won't work if you can't feel it." "Feel it? What do you mean?" Agent Cass asked. Sara looked at her with confusion, but then remembered how she asked if she needed to know what happened. "This is the first time you've seen this. My healing powers, I mean." "Yeah, I was told your powers were unmatched." "Aren't they?" "They are, but—" Sara tried to think of how to say it, but gave up. "I guess I should just do it, and see if it works." Placing a hand on the man's shoulder, Sara started the healing. A dim light came from where she was touching and spread across the man's body. If you were to listen closely, you could hear what sounded like a chorus singing. Of course, it was currently being drowned out by the sound of the machines, especially the heart monitor, that started beeping faster and faster as the man's heart started to race. 100 beats a minute, then 200, then 300. After that, it continued to climb up into the 400 and was nearing 500 when he finally awoke screaming at the top of his lungs. Rather he would have, if not for the hose jabbed down his throat. Sara stopped the flow of power and stepped back as Agent Cass stepped forward, trying to hold the man down, shouting as she half-grappled the man, Danny, it's okay! You're okay! Let me get this tube out your throat." "Cass?" the man called Danny said as his voice was freed. He was calm and looked around. "What happened? What's going on? Where's the girl? Where's the bastard?" "Relax, it's all good. You saved the world, Danny, then I saved you," Cass explained. "And then I went to grab this girl. Apparently she can heal you." Danny looked over to Sara and sighed in relief. The heart monitor dropped back down to 100, and he said, "Oh, the Valentine girl. That explains that." "Explains what?" Agent Cass asked. "Why it felt like I was in the VIP zone of damnation. Why didn't you wake me?" He looked at Sara with the highest level of annoyance, but she didn't have an answer to that. A moment later he sighed, and with humble sympathy said, "Apologies. I'm sure my dumbass rookie partner is to blame somehow." "Hey, I pulled your ass out of the fire, literally," Cass said. "Yeah, but I had to jump in there to save your dumbass. You have a gun for a reason, dumbass," Danny said. Cass glowered at him, but then turned sad and mumbled under her breath, "Sorry about that." Danny huffed. "Oh, don't be like that. If this job was easy, they wouldn't hire dumbasses like us to do it. They get some educated pansy to do it. And just shoot him when he asks for a raise." Danny laughed and Cass smiled, until Danny's laugh turned into coughs and the heart rate monitor started going off again. "Danny, you okay?" Cass asked. "I need more healing," Danny explained. "Couldn't you use another method now, like blue water?" Sara asked. Her powers weren't actually the only healing power of her scale, but they were faster, near instant. Blue water was the most common recovery option for agents, but that took time. "Aye, But every day I'm in a tube, I can't be fighting. Every minute you heal me is one less hour in the blue. So if you don't mind, I will, if you want, but... The pain. The more you heal, the more it hurts. Danny closed his eyes and thought for a moment. Looking to her again, he made an offer. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what happened while you heal me. If it gets too much for me to talk, then you can stop. Fair? Sara nodded. Okay, fair. She started the process as Agent Danforth, his actual name, started the story. We had just finished handling a gang of small fry hoodlums when we got the call. A report about a working of magic energy down south. We rode down to Nowhere, Virginia to an old farmstead, but things started adding up wrong fast. From the first sight of the property I could tell something was off. There were 3 buildings, a house, a barn, and a shed. All 3 of them looked like they were old and dilapidated, like their last use was 100 years ago. Sounds about right, right? Except they all seemed to be in the same state of decay, and were evenly rotten across all 3 buildings. Not impossible, but it was uncanny for a structure to fall apart at an even rate. Just something you pick up after a few decades. So we started searching the buildings. Started with the house. It was completely barren. No furniture, no pictures of anything. And not a single pot or pan in the kitchen. After a quick scan of the shed and barn, to find them equally empty of tools and equipment, that's when I knew this place was a setup. Wait, couldn't they have just taken the tools with them? Sara asked. That's what I said, Cass added. A few things here and there, sure, but everything? Danforth said. Either some professionals came through there, or no one ever lived there. So they moved, maybe to another farm, and did hire professionals, Sara proposed. I also said that, Cass explained, but Danny shot me down quick. Because if they could afford to hire professionals, then they could afford new tools, Danforth explained. You can't put importance on every rake and shovel. Someone made that place just how it was, and I even double-checked. After I answered Cass's rookie question, I called HQ to do a deep check on the property records in Virginia. The records seemed to be straight and true, both the digital and analog records dating back to the hundreds. But the tell was deeper. Back during the Mutant Revolt, there was this big push to make digital copies of all analog records. They called it the Great Crunch of '92, because it took so much manpower to keep everything going straight and smooth between all the destruction and infighting. It was that bit of chaos where an error was made. Because they were drafting up a roster for all the files, they needed to be transferred over to the Crunch file. It too was stored in both analog and digital files, and the filing was listed on both, but the analog was missing a completely different listing. There were so many listings per page, and you couldn't edit the whole thing. And so, I had HQ contact the Federal Data Storage and ask for a possible copy. Luckily, the very page in question had been faxed once showing a perfect alignment of the listings, sans the one we were at. A smoking gun so far away? It might have been a sniper rifle. It was the proof that the place was a front for something. That's a really small and very specific detail, Sara pointed out in disbelief. Oh yeah, Danforth chuckled. Would you believe me if I told you it wasn't the first time such a detail had cracked entire cases through? Sara thought for a moment. Honestly, I don't know. I wouldn't, Cass said, shrugging. Not for a moment, and I was there. Danforth ticked. Fine, I'll just continue the story. So with my suspicion confirmed, we started to search the area. We scanned the entire property, through the fields and around the perimeter. We didn't bother to search the house. If the entities at work were capable of faking official documents, they wouldn't make it possible to find their secret by following dusty footprints. The shed was a lifted building, and the barn had all dirt flooring. Cass didn't detect any magic, so we stomped through the grass and brush. But there wasn't anything obvious. The field was overgrown with weeds with no clear breaks or trees. Another slip. Because while an entire forest wouldn't spring up, over 100 years, you would at least see a few saplings. But the whole field with grass and bushes. We spent about 4 hours scouring the property, and were just about to call it in when I saw it. Reflecting the setting sun was a stabilization pond. A hole you dump your waste in and let nature handle it at her own pace. Common enough in rural areas, so it wouldn't draw the attention of those in the know. And those not in the know just saw a pool of dirty water. A perfect place for a secret. It was a good-sized hole, about 6 feet deep and 20 feet across, with the water itself being shallow. The drain pipe was about 3 feet wide, and covered in overgrowth. But we cut through it to find it widened to be over 7 feet just a few steps in. We had found the entrance to what? We had no idea. We drew our weapons and started down the tunnel. Walked for about a mile or so, putting us under the fields by my count. And the walls were all covered with patterns of runes. Couldn't tell what for, but I could feel they were weaving into a massive web that stretched across the entire property. Eventually, the tunnel ended, opening up to something like a missile silo. At the bottom of the silo was a circle of people, chanting something. I couldn't tell what. We found stairs going down, and descended trying to get closer. Turned out the place was a full-on maze, with disconnected hallways and stairs going up and down. Doors lined the halls going to different rooms. Some storage with boxes and crates, some sleeping areas with bunk beds like a barracks. We were about halfway down when the rookie got us in trouble. "Bull! That wasn't my fault!" Cass shouted. "The other thing, sure, but that guy would have seen you just the same." "Yeah," Danford agreed. "But I wouldn't have yelled at the top of my lungs, telling everyone we were from the DDH. Cass blushed at that. "Oh, yeah, sorry." "What happened?" Sara asked so Danford could continue. "We got caught and ended up in a fight. Turns out there was near 100 people there, and they all had guns. So we had to fight our way through after that. They mostly had 32 standards, but some of them had special assault weapons, and we only had big shots, which would down anyone it hit, but we only had so many rounds." "You were killing them?" Sara asked before looking away. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't." Danforth waved her off. "It's fine. Yeah, we were. Mostly me. But to be fair, we tried being peaceful until they shot me." "With what? It had to be a big gun," Sara asked. "Nope, just a standard. That's not what caused all this. But it was the first blood of the fight," Danforth continued. "After they got me, we were a lot more aggressive. We tried to call it in and get backup, but our comms were blocked by the runes. So we had to fight our way through. Problem was, the place was a true maze, and we didn't make any markings to follow back. Every path seemed to only go deeper and deeper. Rooms started to be filled with more intense supplies. Armament, explosives, and tools for magical workings. We were starting to get an idea of the scale of operations these people had to be working on when we found them. A room with 12 people, bound and gagged, all with sacrificial marks. After that, the plan changed. Whatever this was, we had to stop it now. I ordered the rookie to free the people while I turned to face the army of cultists. I went from aggressive to all out, cutting down waves of the bastards. They tried to rout me, but didn't realize that surrounding me put them at a disadvantage. Not a one of them was prepared for me. I cut through whoever stood against me and made it to the center again, where the chanting circle was still in effect. They were starting the real working of the magic when I stepped in. 12 hooded mooks surrounded a platform where the head mook stood. I told him to stand down, hoping we could finish this clean. But instead the bastard started to monologue about how it was too late. I tried to explain that we had secured his victims, and his plot was over. His response was to pull out a knife and stab himself in the heart. triggering the whatever it was they were doing. Suddenly, the whole silo was filled with chaos. Like a hurricane, an earthquake, a volcano, and a meteor strike, all barreled in and started beating the shit out of each other. The undermooks were swept up and ripped away. Their bodies rose up and into what they had formed, a portal. Not into the domain of greater beings, but into the abyss beyond here. They were trying to destroy everything. Not just the earth or the universe, but the all of everything. People can just do that? Just destroy reality? Sara shouted in disbelief. Sure, she knew ZKT events happened all the time, but those often would have been isolated to destroying just mankind if allowed. Oh no, absolutely not. Such a thing would be impossible to do on just the material plane alone, Danforth explained. It would take a working big enough to get the actual heavyweights involved. But you can try, and you can fail in a big way. The working they had built up would have been enough to crack the earth apart. But luckily we stopped the bulk of it. They would have wiped out the majority of the state of Virginia, but there are insurance policies for such things. Like the Grand Genie, Sara said offhanded, or getting help from Dr. Obvious. Cass was shocked by that. Wait, you know about that? Sure, I've been pulled in for all kinds of cleanups. I've seen such things firsthand, Sara explained, but then frowned down at Danforth. But the thing about those insurance policies is they don't cover everything. If you're as powerful as you're describing yourself, then something like the Grand Genie couldn't bring back Virginia and you, especially if you were at the heart of the event. Yeah, but that's kind of whatever. Danforth shrugged nonchalantly. I would be dead for real, and Cass would need a new partner, but that's the job. Well, you didn't die, Sara pointed out. So what happened? Danforth looked to stare at Cass, who blushed in embarrassment as he continued. I hadn't given up hope yet. I was trying to figure out if there was a way I could stop the boom, and I was more than accepting of ideas that I would survive. The working was a gateway, and I've worked with gateways before. If I could destroy the base of the portal, I could make it collapse into itself. But that's when the rookie came in. She apparently had the same idea, but in a stupid way. She tried to blast away with raw power, and it ended up strengthening the damn thing. After calling her a proper idiot, she explained how she thought she could blast through. I then used some language too rude to repeat in front of a high schooler to explain how if I couldn't break it, then she couldn't, and how she only made it worse. I could still probably undo the working, but not before it went off. And I didn't have time to worry about such things. I had to act. So I completely... Oh, damn! Danforth jolted forward and patted his body. Is the pain too much? Sara asked, cutting off her powers. No, quite the opposite, in fact. It's gone. Completely gone. Danforth pulled his covers off and looked at his body. Wow, I'm completely healed. What? That's impossible, Sara said, also looking over him. The damage done to your body. You can't block the pain out. The healing won't work if you do. I didn't block anything. Danforth stood out of bed and stretched. It just stopped. What does that mean? It means the healing is completely done. But it's more than that, Sara explained. My power heals the effects of old age and disease. Deep damage done to the body over time. It's the most painful of all. Makes sense. I feel like I'm 25 again. No, it doesn't. That's the kind of torment that breaks people's minds. Well, I have a high tolerance for pain, Danforth said, pulling a cigarette out of a nearby coat. I don't ignore pain. I just accept it and move on. That's impossible. I've never met anyone who could do that. Well, you're only 14, Cass spoke up. There was a lot of stuff I never saw until I joined the department. Exactly, Danforth wrapped the coat around his body. You can say you never met someone like me, but now you have. Danforth turned his head and smiled at Sara. She frowned. They were technically right. There was no reason for Sara to think she had seen it all. She just sighed. Well, how does it end? How did you survive and save the world? Like I said, Danforth started to the door. Destroyed the base of the working. After that, I blocked the rest. I've survived because Rookie held me together after. Now excuse me, I need to go report in. Come on, Rookie. Wait, what about the girl? Cass asked, gesturing to Sara. I know how to get back home, Sara said. It's fine, I promise. It took a moment for Cass to accept that, but then just nodded with a, alright then, if you say so. The two agents left the room, leaving Sara behind. She watched the door close and then looked to her hands. She had been doing this for years now, healing heroes and agents on the brink of death, listening to them struggle to tell their stories through their suffering. This had been a first. First time someone managed to be completely healed by her powers. She thought back to the story, the long bits of rationality and notes of detail. She realized that during it all, Danforth never mentioned what kind of demi-human he or Cass were, or explained how their own powers worked. Only vague notes of blasting power, which could have been anything. Secret keeping was an important skill in these lines of work, but pain and suffering broke down rational thoughts. Yet, Danforth only managed to give away basic details of their mission. After a minute, Sara stood up herself and walked out to find the first person she could. A desk receptionist, at the center of the medic rooms. Sara knocked on the counter. Excuse me, I need to return to West Progress High. Lunch is about to start soon.